Game Day Pod, Jake Trotter, Heather Dinich here to break down a huge week. And everybody said last week was like the most chaotic week, which I think happens every 3 weeks now. We just say, oh, this was the craziest week in college football history. That's just what college football does. But now we have some really, really marquee matchups. I think that sometimes we go back and forth on whether or not, or I go back and forth on whether or not conference realignment is a good thing. Then you see Ohio State at Oregon on October 12th, and you start to say, okay, you know what? I see the vision here. I see what you were doing, Big Ten. I see what you're doing, SEC. Heather, what's going on?
Well, I'm really excited for all of these games. And of course, I always look at it as I do through the lens of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, right? And, you know, my big thing is everyone just get ready for teams to lose. That's where we're at. Ole Miss, LSU, one of those teams is going to have a second loss, but everybody just needs to pump the panic brakes here because multiple teams with multiple losses are going to be in the College Football Playoff. And I would argue, even with that, even though it's more forgiving, the regular season means more than ever.
So full disclosure, I went to Miami and I had a friend call me on Saturday after the Virginia Tech game. And he said, he was an Ohio State fan. He says, I have not gone through it. I just want to know, does it feel the same in the 12-team era when your team might lose? Are you sitting there with coping and saying, oh, well, you know, we second loss, whatever? No, it feels the exact same. My heart was going to jump out of my chest. I was pacing. My wife was figuring out how to console me. It's the exact same drama with the 12-team playoff, which I think is the perfect kind of medium there. Jake, what are you looking forward to this week?
Yeah, obviously, Oregon, Ohio State is a huge one. Could be a preview of the Big Ten championship. Who knows? Could be a preview of a future playoff matchup as well. And then Red River, I think is going to be a lot of fun. You know, I know Texas is the big favorite, but having been at a lot of those games over the years, you know, you can throw out the records. It literally, when it comes to Red River, and I would not be stunned if Oklahoma hangs tough in that game.
Okay, we're going to get to that. But Heather, let's start here. The AP poll has been, I would say, very reactive this year, very dramatic. You've seen a lot of swings and a lot of, hey, this is a close loss. We're going to drop this team 4 spots. This is a bad loss. We're going to drop them 10 spots, all that stuff. And I guess I'm curious, the marriage that you see between the AP poll and that kind of reaction and the college football playoff rankings. When this comes out, is it going to be that reactive?
This is not a marriage. This is a divorce. From the AP poll. Okay, this relationship is going to be over on November 5th when the first ranking comes out. I mean, here's the thing, okay? The selection committee does not do it this old school way where you win, you move up, you lose, you move down. I'm telling you, head-to-head results matter in the committee meeting room. And Alabama, as we sit here right this skinny minute, has the best win in the country against Georgia. How do they weigh that against the second worst loss in the country? That dubious distinction goes to our Notre Dame friends who lost at home to Northern Illinois. So when you look at it, and the AP poll did not honor that, obviously. Alabama sank like a rock behind Georgia. And then you have Oregon and Penn State skyrocket. Why? What did they do this week to jump up ahead of Georgia? So if you keep Ohio State and Oregon behind Georgia, which I think the selection committee would do at this point, then it's a safety net for Alabama in that committee meeting room because I think they would honor that head-to-head.
Wow. Jake, how do you view this? And obviously, just to go through it, Alabama dropped six spots in the AP poll. Missouri dropped 12, well-deserved. Michigan dropped 14. I'm not even sure why they're still getting votes. That's a different question. But how do you view how the college football committee should approach this?
Well, number one, I'm waiting for the cowards in the AP poll to put Army and Navy in their top 25 because the academies deserve to be there. And listen, I mean, if Boise State stumbles, like who's to say that one of those two couldn't be in the mix later on in the season? I mean, to me, if I were in the committee room, I'm looking at who you beat more than who you lost to. I think Heather's exactly right. And the AP poll has been way too reactive to losses and less so to wins that happened earlier in the season. So she's absolutely right. I mean, Alabama right now should be in everybody's playoff projection, despite that dismal loss to Vanderbilt. And somebody like Notre Dame, Notre Dame is going to have to do an awful lot, I think, to be there at the end, because we're going to come back and look at Northern Illinois, a team that probably won't win the MAC, and say they have the worst loss of anybody in consideration. And, I think 9-3 in the SEC, 9-3 in the Big Ten, given who some of these teams have to play, is going to look a lot better than what Notre Dame has. Because if USC is not in the top 10 when they play later on in the year, who's Notre Dame's big win going to be? Texas A&M, maybe.
Right.
But I think, to me, who you beat should matter above all else. And instead of looking at records, let's look at who you beat and then who you lost to, and not necessarily the final tally.
Jake, Notre Dame's big wins are going to be against Army and Navy. You got 35 teams.
No, that's why I have Army and Navy making the run when they beat Notre Dame in a couple of weeks.
There you go. Just one quick note. I will be in the house in West Point this Saturday. I'm taking my 20-month-old. The number one piece of feedback I got, I didn't know this, a lot of cannons going off. And so we're going to need some heavy-duty headphones for Teddy Clark, but he's going to be in the house for his second ever football game, and we're very, very excited for that. Heather, Ohio State, Oregon, obviously, is the headliner to, this weekend. And I'm guessing that a relatively close game doesn't really, as long as the rest of the season goes the way we think it's going to go for these two teams, a relatively close game doesn't really affect these guys' chances too much. How do you think the committee is going to view these sort of heavyweight matchups?
Well, I think this could be a preview of the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah.
I mean, these are two of the best teams in that league, unless Penn State decides to say otherwise. I've got them on upset watch, though, at USC this week. So we'll see what happens there. Look, I talked to Dan Lanning this week, and he told me that his team is not the best version of itself. And like every college football coach in America, he wants to see that in November, right? He also told me he's not panicking about Dylan Gabriel's interceptions in the red zone. He said that for the bulk of the season so far, he's played great. Those are the mistakes that can be corrected. They'll get them corrected. Where this game can get interesting is in the turnovers, but also he said the more physical team is going to win, the team that can run the ball better. But look, Ohio State, he said, these were his words. He said, this is a real team. So, this is going to be, they're ready for a dogfight in this one. But Ohio State, guys, is so talented. And and I feel like they've just quietly been simmering there because they haven't played anybody yet. Well, this is where it gets real, and I can't wait to see it.
It's going to be interesting, Jake, and we have a lot more coming because you wrote a great story on Ryan Day and Chip Kelly. We'll get to that in a second. But for me, it's going to be interesting. The portal is, and Oregon and Ohio State have used the portal very, very well. But to me, it's almost like what happened with the NFL post CBA in 2011, where practice time was cut and really teams weren't their final form until November. And I'm wondering if something similar is going to happen, where if you have a portal heavy team, it's going to take September and October to even build that chemistry. I mean, it's a totally new world. I'm wondering how you view that as far as just these teams and when they're going to be able to play their best football.
Yeah. I mean, Ohio State has been building to October and November. They only scored 17 points in the opener against Akron. Yeah. And everybody in Columbus in the state of Ohio was freaking out. Like, is this team overrated? Are we going to lose to Michigan again? And, you have to be patient, because not only do you have new players in Quinshon Judkins coming from Ole Miss, Will Howard at quarterback coming from Kansas State, Jeremiah Smith at receiver is a true freshman, but you also have a new play caller coming in Chip Kelly from UCLA. And I think the thing that Ohio State was trying to do then and has since been trying to do is, we're not trying to beat Akron by 70. We are trying to establish an offensive identity so that we can beat Oregon in October and Penn State in November, and then potentially Georgia or Alabama in December, January. So I think Ohio State's best football is ahead of it. And given the playmakers that they have, I don't think there's a better quartet of playmakers in college football right now. When you look at Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson at running back, and then Emeka Ibuka, we completely forget about, who was a preseason All-American, and then Jeremiah Smith, who's been electrifying at receiver. When you have four guys like that you can rotate at running back and target differently in the passing game, and you got a guy that can make it all happen, and an experienced quarterback like Will Howard, look out. I mean, Ohio State, we have not seen the best of what the Buckeyes have to offer, and Dan Lanning is absolutely right when he says we're getting ready to play a real team. This is a real team that they have at Ohio State.
I think they have the best roster in the country. Just when you look at every single position, I don't even really think it's that close on paper. We'll see how that bears out. The other thing, Jake, you mentioned, but like you can drop a game now. And so if you're trying to figure out your identity, if you're going full Kansas City Chiefs and saying, hey, we'll just spend September working on this and hopes that it pays off in November, you can drop a game now. So it's not as important as it was 10 years ago. Real quick, 2 ACC questions. I had to get my ACC talk in there. We'll start with Clemson. 4-1 overall, 3-0 in conference play. A month ago, the sky was falling. Everybody was saying Dabo's system didn't work. To me, and I could spend an hour on this, to me, it was always strange that FSU was the chalk pick in the ACC going into the season, not Clemson, because I think that Clemson's recruiting in high school at least gives them a floor, whereas FSU was living and dying by the portal, and they ended up dying by it. Heather, do you think that the criticism of Dabo was too much a month ago and that this Clemson team has really rebounded?
I think time will tell the answer to that question. Here's why. Clemson is rolling against teams it should beat. The bulk of the ACC is weak. Let's be honest. This is not a very deep league. And if they play any more ranked opponents at all, it'll probably be Miami in the ACC championship game.
In Charlotte, yep.
Right. So the reason we need to press the pause button on that answer is because let's say they're in the college football playoff. Then how do they do against Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, if they were to meet again, right? Because how much has the gap closed from that season opening lopsided loss with an elite team between August and December? That's the true measure. Not against Wake Forest and NC State and you know, this lackluster lineup of ho-hum teams. But let's give them credit because their offense is rolling. Cade Klubnik is throwing the ball well. I mean, they have found their rhythm for sure. But let's see it against some top 10 opponents in the college football playoff. Then I think we can answer that question.
Jake, to me, and we can kind of twin this with the next question. To me, I think that the ACC can be a 2-bid league if it's Miami and it's Clemson. And that if Clemson drops the ACC title game with 2 losses, I still think, I mean, so much of it depends on obviously what happens in November with the Power 2 conferences. I really do think they could be a two-bid league. How do you see that playing out if there is a 11-1 Miami team that loses in the ACC title game, or a 2-loss Miami team, but they have Cam Ward and he's in New York for the Heisman ceremony? Maybe the committee doesn't want to keep him out. Where do you see that? And you know, obviously Big 12 in the same boat as far as do they get 2 bids? How do you see the committee looking at that?
Don't you guys think that it's either going to be the ACC or the Big 12 that gets 2 bids, but not both conferences?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, and I think the Big 12 has been all over the place. Like I have no idea who's going to win that league. I mean, throw a dart and you might hit the conference champion in the end. I mean, I think Kansas State and Utah would probably be the 2 best teams if Cam Rising can get back healthy. Yeah. But BYU's been impressive. Iowa State is the win over Iowa. So we'll see what happens in that league. But I have a hard time seeing the Big 12 getting 2. And then Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois was huge for the ACC and the Big 12 if they're going to get a second team in. Because again, as bad as the ACC is, Heather, and I don't appreciate the disrespect to Pitt, which is in the top 25 and winning games magically every week. But I think the second team in the ACC has a chance to have a better resume than Notre Dame in the end. So I think the ACC definitely can have 2 teams. It probably would need to be Clemson and Miami. You know, Klubnik is top 5 in college football nationally in QBR. Like they quietly have righted the ship offensively. And there's not a game on their schedule the rest of the year they can't win. So if you're asking me, can Clemson make it and can the ACC get 2 bids? Yes. If you're asking me, can Clemson make a run and are they on the level of Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, Texas? That's a different question. And I don't think they are anymore. But yeah, I think the ACC can definitely get 2. And I think given what's happened to Notre Dame and some of, Michigan, USC, Ole Miss, some of these teams that we thought were going to make it now struggling a little bit, I think that the ACC and or the Big 12 can definitely get 2 in at this point.
Yeah, I think it's not a matter of can they hang with Ohio State. It's a matter of are they on the level of a 3-loss Texas A&M team in the committee's eyes. For me, Heather, you're the expert on this, and so I would genuinely want to pick your brain on this as someone with an affinity for Miami. My feeling is that Cam Ward is almost insurance for Miami because the committee, if it's 2 losses or 1 loss, is going to want a guy like that in. I think the problem with FSU, it wasn't just the injury, but it was that everybody watched the Florida and Louisville game and said, we don't want to watch one of the 2 playoff semifinals and it's just Trey Benson running counter 46 times a game. Like, it was just not aesthetically pleasing. And I'm sure that they didn't say that out loud, but like those games were a tough watch. Obviously in the 12 team playoff, FSU would have made it. But I just think that Clemson, Miami, the brands, just the excitement around them, that weirdly helps to where if it was Wake Forest, it was a 2-loss team. I think you're in a different scenario, Heather.
Well, I'm telling you, they don't look at the value of the brands when they sit at the table.
Sure, Heather. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Listen, here's what. You see these books behind me on my shelf? See these? Every single one of them is a binder from a mock selection that I've been to. So there's at least half a dozen back there. So I've sat at the table, and when you're sitting at the table with the same data that they have, I'm telling you, you are zeroed in on, oh, they beat this team. Notre Dame lost to NIU. Wait a minute. This team's defense is so good. This team's special teams. You're so in the weeds on their schedule, their resume, what you saw, what you remember from seeing in these games, that you're not sitting there saying, this is K-State, this is Miami, this is this brand or that brand. You're truly focused on the numbers and the analytics in front of you. So we'll start there, right? But Miami is going to have a strength of schedule issue in that committee meeting room. And so will Clemson. They're 2 peas in a pod like this. If they stumble to a team they shouldn't, right? The best chance that they can have is losing to each other, running the table, right? And then losing to each other in the conference championship game. Because anything other than that, you're going to have that resume come under the microscope in the committee meeting room. And look, you're right. Maybe Jake, it does trump what resume, Notre Dame's resume at the end of the day. We have to see, and that's the other thing too, is where are your opponents ranked by the committee on selection day? Not what were they ranked on August 31st in the season opener or whatever, because a win against Florida State now certainly doesn't mean what we thought it meant on Labor Day, right? So all of those things come into the picture, but I don't think that the branding is a big part.
All right. Jake and I are on one side of this debate, but you're the expert, so your vote carries a lot there.
2014 TCU would like a word, Heather.
3-6.
So UCF would like a word, I think. And there's a couple people like word, but Miami is just not, is obviously a different bucket. I feel like if Miami, so hypothetically, if Miami loses next week at Louisville and then loses the AC title game, I think they're probably, as long as something crazy doesn't happen, and I think they're probably gonna sneak in. But I think Miami's pretty good, and I think the last couple weeks. And by the way, like one thing I think the committee's probably going to take into account is like playing at Cal. I think Big Ten teams are 1-8 going 2 time zones west at this point. Like playing on the West Coast is really hard. And a lot of, I think only Indiana beating UCLA is the only team in the Big Ten that is won on the West Coast right now, which everybody who's grew up a Big Ten fan, you always knew when the team went to go play Washington or went to go play USC in September, it was always a loss. And now Big Ten fans are realizing that now. Let's talk a little bit about the group of 5, Heather. So there's a lot here with Boise State. We mentioned it earlier. Jake did. Is there any other team that is in the mix right now, or does Boise State need to fumble in order to not get that spot?
Well, we can't write off UNLV just because they lost on a Friday night to Syracuse, because it's the 5 highest ranked conference champions. And for the casual football fans listening, Mountain West Conference, Boise State, UNLV, they're going to play each other. This is going to be settled on the field. I think what separates Boise State right now is the fact that they went to Oregon and almost won. Yep. And there is such a thing in that committee meeting room as a good loss, and that certainly counts as one of them. They're going to play Washington State and Oregon State because of that Pac-12 Mountain West partnership with scheduling. They've already defeated one of those teams. So they're going to have the resume. And you mentioned Cam Ward. The committee does like star power. I have been on those teleconferences after rankings, and the committee chair will mention this player and that Heisman caliber player. They notice that, and Boise State's got one in their running back, Ashton Jeanty, who should be in New York for that Heisman conversation.
Yep, I agree. Jake, how do you see this G5 playing out here?
Well, if they like star power, what about Blake Horvath, Heather? That's right in your backyard. Just number one in the country in quarterback efficiency. Navy's airing it out. This is a question I have for Heather. So I agree with everything you said. It almost feels like Boise's to lose at this point. Like they probably have a better chance to get to the playoff than anybody in college football when you really think about it, because they have that group of 5 spot. Like I think if we were just looking at odds, I think they are more likely to get in than maybe not Ohio State, but certainly like Oregon or Notre Dame or Tennessee, somebody like that. What would have to happen for the group of 5 representative to not be the winner of the Mountain West Conference vis-a-vis Boise State? Like, is there any scenario where we could see somebody else from another conference sneak in? It feels like a long shot, but isn't it possible? What would have to happen?
Real quick, before Heather answers that, I looked at the betting lines for the G5 spot. Boise State, obviously a huge favorite. Second, Liberty. Third, Tulane. Fourth, Memphis. Fifth, Louisiana. So those are kind of the candidates there. And Toledo is also right behind that, but that's a long way to go.
Well, I would just answer that question by saying, look back at week 6 to see all of the upsets. I mean, I wouldn't consider anyone a lock. And I agree with everything that you're saying. To me, it's Boise State to lose. I guess that's the best way to phrase it, right? That's what it feels like right now. But they can lose. And I talked to Spencer Danielson about this. And that's a fine line of saying to your guys, hey, we went to Oregon and almost beat them. You can play with anyone. You can beat anyone. But coaches are also pointing to week 6 and saying you can lose to anyone. So consistency is the key. They can lose to UNLV. That's how they get left out. Period. They can lose to UNLV. UNLV can win the Mountain West. We're having a different conversation. I would also throw 2-loss Tulane into this conversation because they can win the American. Both of their losses are to Oklahoma and I'm forgetting the
Kansas State. They lost to K-State. A game they should have won, by the way.
Yep.
Yeah. I picked Tulane in the upset in that one.
That's what happened to them.
Yeah, exactly. It's the HD KOD, right? But yeah, so it can happen. But you're right, Jake. It's theirs to lose, it feels like.
All right, let's talk about the games this weekend. We will start with Red River. Quinn Ewers expected to be back this weekend. We'll start with you, Jake. Do we see Arch Manning at all for the rest of the year?
Well, as long as Quinn stays healthy, I think this is going to be his job. This idea that there was a quarterback controversy is a farce. I saw Quinn Ewers play live in Ann Arbor earlier this year. People don't give him enough appreciation for how good he is. I mean, Texas should have been up 31-3 at halftime in that game. They had a touchdown pass on their opening drive, negated on a holding call. He's terrific. And the other thing that you get a sense of when you're around the Longhorns, they believe in him. Like they believe this is the guy. And so Arch Manning's going to be that guy eventually, and Arch Manning's going to play in the NFL. His time will come. Right now, it's Quinn Ewers. And I think that they are better with Quinn Ewers than they are with Arch Manning.
I'm going to make a quick case that Arch Manning is one of the most important players in college football, and here's why. I don't think he's going to play again. I completely agree with you. But in an era where you need more depth than ever because of the 12-team playoff and extra games, going to be the longest college season of all time, nobody has it because of the portal. Everybody's losing their backups. No, everybody's playing a shell game with quarterback and saying, oh, we have to go tamper with this kid from the G5. Well, guess what? Texas has 2 legitimate quarterbacks, and I don't think you can put a price on that. Or maybe you can. In the portal, you can, but that's a separate issue. Heather, how do you see this game playing out?
Well, I talked to Oklahoma coach Brent Venables this week, and he has a lot of confidence, and he knows, just like everyone else does, that offense has to be better. They're 100th in the country going into this game in offensive efficiency. But guess what? They're top 10 in defensive and special teams efficiency. So he's going into this as if we can just piece together some of our best performances on offense for one complete game. He's telling his guys, we don't have to play perfect, but we have to play our best game. If they can create turnovers, which they've been doing, get a short field against these guys, and that hitting yardage in special teams, that's what is in his defensive brain right now. And I asked him about Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning. Doesn't matter. Same with Sark. Doesn't matter who's playing. They're not going to defend them any differently. So their confidence is high going into this one. And he does not care what the spread is, doesn't care what the odds are, because they've overcome them before.
Jake, you have a story on Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, the New Hampshire connection, obviously playing a massive role in this Ohio State game, this Ohio State season. The fact that Chip Kelly would want to come back, I'm not sure how into modern college football Chip was. He just wants to call plays and have pieces like Jeremiah Smith and Judkins and even Will Howard, who you saw run the ball a little bit more last week. I think Chip Kelly has shown about 0.2% of his playbook over the first month of the season because he didn't have to. What is this connection like, and how is it going to show itself on Saturday?
Yeah, these guys have known each other since Ryan Day was in high school, basically. So they have an inherent trust in one another. I asked, Ryan Day what it was like, what it's been like having Chip run his offense. And, he said that because of their shared experience, shared history, he doesn't just trust Chip Kelly with his offense. He trusts Chip Kelly with his life.
Yeah.
He said that. He said that multiple times. And so I think that it's been the perfect partnership because it's not easy for a head coach to give up play calling. We
for sure.
see that in the NFL all the time. We see it in college football where it becomes problematic. And so Ryan got somebody he really trusts and believes in to run the offense. And to this point, it's been seamless. So I think with those two together, it's a perfect marriage. And I would expect this Ohio State offense to reach its peak this season. I think it's going to max out. And that's scary because this Ohio State offense, when it's maxed out, is the best offense in college football, in my opinion, based on the playmakers they have. So it's a unique situation where you have, the offensive brain trust for a blue blood college football program.
Yeah.
They played for the same youth sports coaches. They played for the same coaches in high school. And then Chip was Ryan Day's offensive coordinator at UNH. So they have a long history together. And I think that that's going to be an asset for them this year.
Hey, Heather, I'm curious. You talk to a lot of coaches, so much about college football. I'm curious if there's going to be more Chip Kellys. What I mean by that is a guy who says, you know what, I don't want to deal with the portal for 30 days and all that. I just want to call plays. And we've seen guys who are G5 head coaches go be offensive coordinators places. We've seen that a little bit more where you don't really want to be the CEO in this era. Do you think that Chip could maybe be a part, not the start, but a part of a trend of guys who just want to coach ball?
It could be, but look, and I've said this before, these guys who are head coaches are getting paid a lot of money to figure out all the other aspects of it.
That's what the money's for, as Don Draper said.
Yeah. So, it just depends. I mean, I have certainly seen at the commissioner level and athletic directors, we've seen a lot of turnover recently in the wake of all of these changes in college athletics, and certainly could impact some coaches, but I don't think it's going to be some sweeping trend, so to speak. I think it's a very individual type thing, and also depends on your job status as a head coach.
Yeah, I'd say. Last thing is I'm excited that this question was thrown to us by the producers because it gets us to wildly speculate. Dark horse team to win the college football playoff championship right now. We will start with Jake Trotter.
Well, the team that I've had my eye on, and they let me down recently, is Tennessee. And I still believe in Tennessee. Nico, their quarterback, is electrifying. They had a weird game at Arkansas where they had a chance to score at the end to win, couldn't finish off a drive. That's a tough place to win, Arkansas. And I think that the Razorbacks are better than they have been under Sam Pittman there. So I'm keeping my eye on Tennessee. They're going to have opportunities coming up. They've got Alabama later this month. They've got Georgia on the road in November, potentially the SEC championship game. I don't think Tennessee is going to win the league, but if you're looking for somebody, the wild card berth, is that what we're calling the non-top four?
I guess so.
If you're looking for one of the wild card teams that could make a run, Tennessee, with their defense, as much talent as they have on the defensive line and up front, and the quarterback to make plays, I think that would be a team, if I'm looking outside the Ohio States, the Georgias, the Alabamas, that could make a run. The Volunteers, the team to watch.
Yeah, to push back on that for like, first of all, Nico is one of the worst quarterbacks under pressure in the entire country this year. The left tackle play was unbelievably bad. But also, the thing that I'm worried about is Arkansas kept everything in front of them on Saturday and just said, hey, we're going to let you beat us with short completions. I always want to see, especially with young quarterbacks, whether that's the blueprint now or that's just an adjustment. Like it's not about getting stopped once. It's about, do you have a second pitch once you get stopped? So that to me is going to be the most interesting thing. Heather, how about you?
Well, see, so when you say dark horse, I'm like, Jake, I go outside of my top 12.
There you go.
He's shaking his head. I go onto the bubble.
You better not say Miami. If you say Miami.
No,
I'm going way dark horse, like true, legit. And I'm going to go with Texas A&M because.
Yes, it's mine too.
Well,
yay! We actually answered the question put to us by producers, unlike Jake Trotter.
There you go. I mean, look, I think what we saw from the Aggies against Mizzou was not just a statement and an indictment on the Mizzou side of things, but also Elko's a great hire, a tremendous hire. And is he maybe ahead of expectations? I don't know. Time will tell. We'll see. Might be jumping the gun here, but that's my pick.
Indiana, Heather?
We're bringing the alma mater into the mix, so let's give them a shout out for the undefeated start. But
if I'm not mistaken, Heather, your alma mater and my alma mater are the only two bowl eligible schools in the country.
Is that right?
I believe so. Only two 6-0 teams.
Indiana is 6-0.
Yeah, well, so is Miami.
Also, as an Indiana grad, we know enough to enjoy what you have at the moment and believe it when you see it.
Here's my thing on the Aggies. First of all, it's kind of what I alluded to, where you're portal heavy, you turned over the roster. There's still a lot of talent there. Remember, 2 years ago, they had the best recruiting class in the history of college football by 24/7. They do not have the best roster. That's still Alabama by a wide margin, then Georgia, then Ohio State, if you look at the recruiting aggregate, right? What's it called? The talent composite. But they're still up there. They have portal additions like Nick Scarton who are making genuine impacts. They knew how to take away Missouri stretch play, and then from there, everything was over for the afternoon. They have a lot of athletes. They're figuring out their quarterback thing. It's the kind of thing, Heather, in a 12-team playoff where if you're playing your best football in November or October, their committee's going to see that, reward that, put you in, and then anything can happen. So I think they're the one team that has enough talent to actually and the way the bracket's going to go, you get the G5 team, and then all of a sudden you have to just beat one Power 2 team. And then all of a sudden it's Ohio State. They have a bad game, then you win the national championship. That to me is going to be the true chaos. I will not say Miami. I genuinely think that they have problems in the secondary, problems tackling. I could, again, go 30 minutes on that. But I do think that I would guess they're a semifinal team at this point. Anyway, that's for the Miami podcast I'll be doing with myself in the next room, just talking to myself in the mirror for the next 3 hours. Heather Dinich, Jake Trotter, thank you so much for coming on the Game Day Podcast.